Mike, since you're active in healthcare?
Well, one of the examples I gave was, and I suppose it's similar to the thing that you were speaking to, Gert, is the provision of healthcare, or the way in which healthcare organizations organize themselves to deliver healthcare to groups of people. And that's just, we all know it could be more efficient, I suppose. It's a very complex problem. But at the other end of the spectrum, and it's highly regulated for good reasons, because the potential for exploiting information about people's personal health records and treatment, or the mistakes if you do something wrong, or the stakes are very high. But in a less regulated environment, at least somewhat less, in terms of drug discovery and the analysis of clinical research, there have been already very interesting advancements made, which are more or less functions of insight discovery. So there's a lot of data that comes from clinical trials, and often what people are trying to do is observe what are the patterns that I should be paying attention to, what genes are expressing a reaction to a certain treatment. And people do this today, statisticians do this today, and try and derive insights. But there are new advancements in that field where computers can do a different job. I'm not sure it's better, but it's different. But computer plus expert turn out to be much better than before. So some of even their startups that we've been talking to have been able to amplify a person or a team of people who normally were trying to look at the clinical results of the trial and determine how to change the course of the drug treatment or protocol they're formulating. And they've made significant advances just because their ability to look at a larger set of data and consider some very, keep in their heads, with the assistance of what's called machine learning, many different potential correlations, seems to be enhancing their ability to derive useful insights from that data. So I can't say that, obviously, I don't think there's been a drug that's been discovered solely due to machine learning, but there have been several papers published in Science about observations that maybe this cancer really is 4 different cancers, right? And this particular drug being developed is particularly, I forget the medical term, anyway, particularly useful for this particular, instead of trying to treat all 4 as if it was one, you can target one of them and do really well. So, I mean, that's a non-healthcare but still related example.
Right, great. Toby, you had a question.
Yeah, I think some of it was answered in the case studies, but there was a book out, I think a year and a half ago, called The 2-Second Advantage, and they talked about moving from behavioral or predictive, if you will, to anticipating as kind of the next phase. And I think some of that you alluded to already with Turbine, but like with Google now, how do you see the transition from predictive to anticipate as part of the big data move? If that makes sense.
That's a great question. I'm trying to, it's not.
So I guess could you elaborate more on your anticipate part?
Maybe
Well,
clarify.
It's similar, like what Google Now is doing, right? So if you're walking by on University Avenue and it happens to be 5 p.m., it anticipates you're hungry and serves up a restaurant. And that's obviously done by location meets data meets your history. And I'm wondering, in the machine-to-machine world, where you see leaping from predictive, which is all historically based, to more of an anticipation, future-looking thing as a result of the insights that have been gleaned.
We're not directly involved in this, but I know of examples. So mobile operators and and mobile device manufacturers. My previous life before General Electric was in that field, often have access to your full click stream and your location stream, if you will, depending upon their deal with the wireless operator. So they have an enormous amount of context and actually probably your economic purchase stream. So they have an enormous amount of data. They're still trying to figure out the best way to exploit that without scaring the hell out of you. So I think I've seen demonstrations of anticipatory things like that, but I think one of the impediments to that is they know so much about you that they probably need to be very concerned about an adverse reaction. And I think they would be very tentative to roll those services out first to consumers before they have to think in a very guarded way, or else there'll be some reaction like has occasionally happened to Google in Western Europe, where privacy is a little more important than it is here.
Okay, great. We have 5 more minutes, so I know Jeremy had a question, and then there was a gentleman in the back that had a question. Then we'll answer them real briefly, and then I'd like to ask the panel for a closing remark before we wrap up here. So Jeremy? Oh, okay.
I'm going to ask my question, I'm not Jeremy.
Okay, that's okay.
So a lot of the discussion has been centering around big data and big data analytics, but this data is getting sensed and transmitted by the sensors, and I was wondering if you can comment on the nature of those sensors and if there is disruptions that are anticipated there. Where are they going? What characteristics do they need to have to be these? You're talking about data. This data is coming from somewhere.
Yeah, maybe I'll jump on that first. So our platform is a big part of what we've actually pre-built into it. Is that in the existing machine-to-machine market, there's about 20 or 30 companies that make most of the. You could almost think of as more as aftermarket sensors, things you put onto a machine, et cetera. But they also make what are called the modules that get designed in. They've had this sort of stalwart business that's been running for really since the late 90s with the sort of first generation of fleet management trackers, just GPS trackers that are very rugged and go into vehicles. But those same companies are now being kind of forced into designing things like modules that go into, I'm working with a company right now that's got a next generation coffee maker that's going to use our service as a front for that coffee maker. And so those same companies that were designing fleet trackers are being sort of, because they have all the expertise and knowledge and the electrical engineering capability and supply chains and everything, they're being sort of pulled into a world where it's lower cost, somewhat compared to what they're used to, like lower level applications. There's huge difference between a long haul truck and a coffee maker that goes into Starbucks. So we're seeing a lot of innovation there, and what I'm actually seeing is that folks are spinning off from those companies and they're starting their own generation of startups. There are actually hardware incubators springing up right around here. There's 2 up in the city that are near my office, one actually right around the corner from our office, that are creating new things. They're brand new modules and transistors and sensors. If anybody's interested, I can kind of point folks in the directions of a few because we're starting to partner with all of them. But if you look at Raspberry Pi, is a big sort of movement that's underway right now. There's another board called Arduino. You can basically just think of these as sort of like the boards that are in your smartphones, except a little bit lower powered and with less memory, but they run at about $15, $25, whereas some of the people that are already entrenched in the sensor market are used to making things for like $50, $75, $100. And that's a huge difference in price. When you talk about designing something into a new product at like an asset OEM level, or just you're going to go out and attach some existing thing with a sensor that you already own. So off the top of my head, and again, I'd be happy to share this with anybody afterwards, there's about 6 or 7 companies that I've met with. They even just recently, they're springing up like weeds that are making new hardware sensors. Kickstarter, by the way, is a great place to go and get kind of a sense of some of the stuff that's happening out there. There's folks that are actually just making modules that are on Kickstarter, as opposed to full-blown sensors. There's also some really funny stuff on there, like a smart fork. Interesting thing. But it's a real
Form of
movement.
censorship.
Yeah, it's a real movement. I think it's interesting for the venture capital community too, because you know, if you follow Kickstarter, they're at that point where there were a lot of people raised a lot of money for a lot of these new wave gadgets and gizmos and sensors, and now I got to fulfill those orders. And then they're running into like, oh, I've actually got a lightweight, heavy capital play on my hands here, and I've got to go build a hardware business. But there's hardware businesses that are springing up, that are designing sensors in, or designing new sensors that are getting funding from places like Google. I know Google just, I can't tell you who, but they just put some money into a hamburger making machine, you know, fairly recently. That's part of a strategy to do some other stuff. So there's money, you know, coming in to disrupt the sensor world.
Yeah, dramatic cost reduction, and that's what Brian was referring to. I think that's a big thing. And another one that came up is video analytics. Why do I mention that? There's a lot of things we could actually do with video if we were only able to analyze it real time and have it fully automated. You can still see, look at Boston, look at London, some of the terrorist incidents, for example, where hundreds of people have to sit for tens of hours and go through the various video feeds to find out what was going on and then kind of go back in time. If we could only automate that. And that also applies, you could put sensors and much smarter video analytics in a vehicle to prevent accidents from happening and things like that. I think that's where a lot of disruption will happen.
Are you seeing companies in that area?
Some of them, it appears to be a very difficult business. If you really have a disruption, and it's incredibly difficult to find a paying customer for that, so how do you build a business around that? If you have evolutionary improvement, then it's like, well, how significant is that improvement for someone to change existing deployment? So the go-to-market of that appears to be a big challenge.
I see. Yeah, so the last question in the back before we have the panelists wrap up.
So, hello. Interesting from Utopia Global. My question is for the gentleman from PG&E. Your comments about how you went about choosing a platform and a vendor were really interesting, and I wanted to ask you two parts. So, if you hear Dr. Hasso-Plattner talk about it, between SAP HANA and everything around it, from diverse data sources on one end to diverse analytics on the other, you don't need anything else. So, first part of my question is, what led you to choose the Teradata solution? Was it the data model that you were mentioning, or was it anything else?
No, good question. So primarily, yes, the data model, because again, like I said, right, it's very important for a business to have a data model that is a very close match to theirs, so that it again comes back to time to market, which is being able to implement it as a solution for the business. But further, it's about the extensibility, right, and the amount of money you spend and customizing the fields and bringing it to a point where it's easy to basically fetch data from the source systems, or like from the headends in this case, right, like the meter data management systems, right. There's a particular kind of attribute if it's coming in, and if that's something which doesn't exist in the data model, then you have to spend cycles in creating it, making sure that other systems, right, that talk to it, like in this case customer care and billing, right, CC&D, you have your data warehouse also sync with it. So there's a lot of associated costs that go with it. That was one. Second thing was accelerators and solutions, really, that the vendor has built around it. So looking in the future, right, what the future needs are, and where we think the vendor's moving in the right direction in terms of building use, basically solutions around, maybe predictive analysis for kind of asset maintenance, or even condition-based monitoring. So these are areas where we had to really use references, and we had discussions with them to see where the company is really moving towards. And the third thing is, again, going to partnerships, right? What sort of partnerships they have in place to see how easy it is to onboard, analytics on top of the platform itself.